Welcome to this week's Therapeutic Tuesday. And this week we have another one of the mini sessions. And in this session, I'm working with Anna. And the kind of opening to this is that Anna felt like that she's been doing everything right and she's been kind of following the OHC Optimal Health Clinic approach, but hasn't felt like she's making progress. And we kind of get deeper into it. And I think this session's a really good application of the stages of recovery. And I don't want to kind of give the secrets away, you'll see in the video, but what starts to become clear is actually there's clear signs of transition from stage 1 to stage 2. And we talk about what some of the signs are of that. So if you've been struggling to identify which of the 3 stages of recovery you're at, and if you're not familiar with stages of recovery, we've got separate videos on YouTube. You could just search 3 stages of recovery, Alex Howard, I'm sure it'll come up. So if you wonder which stage of recovery you're at or what the signs are of transitioning between stages, I think this is going to be really helpful. So do you want to give me a bit more context?
So I've been ill for about 7 years now, and I was doing a PhD part-time, so I was doing about 20 hours a week when I started with the clinic about a year ago now. It was last October, and then as I started to calm down my nervous system, the PhD got harder and harder to do.
What was your PhD in?
It's like bio-nanotechnology. It was like a lot of lab work and things like that. My nervous system started calming down, and then I realised I was like crashing massively around holidays. So as soon as I stopped, I found it really hard to get back up and go again. So earlier this year, I think it was like March, April time, so about seven months ago, I thought I'm gonna take some time off just to like really focus on the recovery, because I thought it'd be difficult to do whilst doing my PhD. And originally I was just going to take the 6 months off and see how I went, but I just like a week into taking the time off, I just like plummeted, and my nervous system was calming down, and I just couldn't really get out of bed. And I've got to the point now where most of the wired is gone. So I get it usually like in the morning I'll start feeling it, but as soon as I start feeling it now, I can calm it down. But I've made a lot of progress like with the nutrition and sorting things out on that side as well. And I've really calmed my system down. I'm doing like all the right things. And it's been sort of 8 months, and I don't even feel like I've got like 1% better. So it's kind of hard to keep that faith and that motivation when I'm not seeing the results, if that makes sense.
It does. Through calming your system, what have you noticed has changed as a result of that? So through being more in a healing state, we'll come to the energy piece in a minute.
Yeah.
But just talk me through some of the other things that may have been impacted by that.
Through being in the healing state, my sleep's really good, and I find it easier to kind of like have a nap in the daytime as well, and like my anxiety is down. I was finding when I was really wired, like the littlest thing, and I'd be so stressed out and annoyed. And I still find that sometimes, but nowhere near as much.
Yeah. So it sounds like, just as I'm kind of getting a kind of feeling into kind of what's happening. So it sounds like up until the point that you took a break from doing your PhD,
Yeah.
that you were in a kind of wired, so you were using kind of wired energy a lot of the time, is that right? So you were you were tired, but you were kind of pushing through, and that was giving you you were just about managing 20 hours a week, but sleep wasn't great, and you were kind of irritable, and you were on edge, and you weren't able to kind of relax. Is that accurate?
No, I actually, so I was talking about compared to when I first stopped my PhD, it became difficult to rest and relax and things, but during my PhD, I think I was so tired when I came home from the end of the day, I'd just sleep, and then I'd sleep really well at night, and then I'd have a day off on a Wednesday, and I'd just kind of sleep during that day as well. Because I was so tired, it kind of cut through any wired.
Yeah.
But you are right, I was running on that adrenaline.
And how about prior to, so when did you start doing the PhD?
I started doing that in 2017. I got ME whilst I was doing my undergraduate degree, and I took about 3 years out, and I think, and I then went back to do my final year of university. And looking back at my final year of university, I just pushed and crashed through that as well. Because I think I went to like an ME clinic at the time when I was getting better. And it was like, it wasn't the same approach as a clinic. It wasn't like, wait patiently for the energy to come. It was like, just try and increase your activity levels. And I don't think I ever really had the real energy to match.
Yeah.
But during my final year of university, I coped a lot better than I was doing a PhD. I think I had a lot more energy then.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And whereabouts are you in the nutrition work? In the email, which I guessing was kind of a couple of months ago, it was saying that you were going to start doing some of the mitochondrial supplements and work in October. Has that started yet, or whereabouts are you in that sequence?
Yeah, so the first thing we did was get rid of the SIBO, which I'm clear of now. And then we did some work with the immune system, and my sore throats have got a lot better. And then in October we started the mitochondrial support.
And you've been on that for how long?
Just over a month. It was at the very beginning of October.
Yeah, so about 4 or 5 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
And what have you noticed since starting those? Did you start at a full dose, or you gradually were building up on those supplements?
I gradually built up, but yeah, over about a week, I gradually built it up. I've found that when I started taking them, my kind of wired feeling started coming back, as I said, like because I take it at morning and lunch, and I find the wired feeling kind of comes back when I take it, but I can kind of calm that down quite quickly now. But that's kind of the only thing I've noticed, really. I haven't noticed any energy or anything coming back yet.
Yeah. How is your pacing at the moment? Do you feel like your activity level is within your capacity?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not really leaving bed much. Apart from, I don't really leave the house apart from doctor's appointments and things like that. And then it's just like I'm mainly in bed apart from when I get something to eat or whatever, or I'll lie on the sofa instead of being in bed if I'm bored of being in my bedroom. So I'm not really doing anything anyway.
And do you feel like when you're resting, your body is resting? Like, do you feel like that you're able to be in a relatively kind of healing state and kind of feel restful, even though your energy is not yet coming back?
Overall, yeah, I would say yeah. Sometimes I have days where I go down for a nap and I get a weird thing where I get an anxiety response to feeling of relaxation. So I do get that sometimes, but overall, the majority of the time, I am able to get that quality rest.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And that sounds like that's partly a result of the work that you've been doing on learning to train your system to calm. I assume you're familiar with our model of stages of recovery.
Yeah.
So just to kind of map this a little bit in there, my sense of what, and I think you've probably already come to some of these conclusions yourself, but just so we're kind of sharing context. So my sense is that you were trying to push your body from stage 2 to stage 3 for quite a long time, that you were in a kind of tired and wired, but you were trying to get out of that by pushing through that. And it sounds like that's partly because you were told to do that. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And you then had this realization 7 or 8 months ago that actually you were constantly kind of cheating yourself in terms of your energy, and that wasn't really something that was working.
Yeah.
And we certainly see this pattern where we're trying to cheat our way out of stage 2, and then someone kind of has a realization like you've had, and you stop and you realize you need to rest, and then it almost feels like you're going back. It feels like you're kind of going into stage 1, which is the crash stage. So stage 1 being the kind of crash or the deep rest stage, stage 2 being tired and wired, and stage 3 being the reintegration stage. That it can almost feel like, well, am I not going backwards? Because at least I could do 20 hours a week of a PhD before. And now it's like I'm in bed much of the time feeling exhausted. So in a sense, to be able to get from it's just not always the case, but it's more often than not, it's the case. To be able to move from stage 2 to stage 3, we need to have had the deep rest and the healing that happens at stage 1. So at stage 1, that's where the body is able to prioritize healing and recovery and repair work pretty much over anything else. And for some people, that period lasts, a month or two. For other people, it can last a year or two. It depends upon the context and the background and kind of what's happening. And if we've had a strong pattern of always trying to push and always trying to get our body beyond where it's really at, then the consequence of that is that there's a kind of deeper repair work that's needed, because there's more underlying exhaustion in a sense in terms of what's going on. So it sounds like what's happened is that you've been able to surrender to being into a kind of stage 1 kind of rest, and that's good in as much as we can see that sleep is good. We can see that most of the time you feel in a calm healing state when you're resting. But I really hear what you're saying. You're like, well, I'm following the plan. Where's the energy? Like, surely I'm supposed to see some kind of payoff in terms of physical energy coming back. So a couple of comments around that. Firstly, I think you already understand this, but I just want to make sure we've got kind of shared context. So people will often come in and say, give me the supplements that give me the energy. And we will say, well, hang on a second, what's the wider picture in terms of what's going on? And for example, if there's something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that's going on, that means that however much good food we eat, it's actually turning into either a toxic load for the system, or at least we're not breaking down and digesting. So we need to deal with things like that often before we start to put in the raw ingredients to support mitochondrial function. What you're describing of when you take the supplements, having a kind of spike of kind of anxiety for a period of time, then you're having to ground, is a really good sign. I know that might sound like a perverse thing to say.
Yeah.
What that tells me is that when you take those supplements, they are actually giving your body a spike of energy.
Right.
But what's happening is your system is still pretty low in its energy capacity. And so it comes in, and the first thing it does is it kind of fuels anxious energy. So you kind of get that kind of wiredness. And then after, I suspect it's probably half an hour or two, it's like it then kind of settles back down again.
Yeah.
So that one of the things that's a bit odd is when energy starts to come back into the system, one of the things that doesn't always happen, but it's pretty common, is actually the sign of improvement is actually anxiety. So the transition from stage 1 to stage 2, so from the crash and the kind of deep rest stage into the kind of tired and wired stage, is the energy initially spikes into the kind of nervous system energy. And then if we do nothing, then we tend to just get more and more wire. But what you're doing is the right thing, is then what you're working on is calming that back into the system. So rather than that just getting, it's a little bit like getting a newspaper and setting fire to it, and it just burns really fast, then it kind of burns out really quickly, as opposed to having a log that kind of doesn't burn as fast, but it gradually is kind of producing more energy ultimately over time. So what we want to do is when that energy starts to come back into the body is really work with calming the system. So rather than burning it like newspaper, it starts to go into your healing and into your energy reserves.
Yeah, that really makes sense, because actually one thing that I hadn't mentioned was over the past couple of weeks, I have had more of this anxiety coming back. Last week I had a couple of nights where I struggled to sleep, and I've had a couple of times where I found it a bit difficult to rest, and I was thinking, oh my God, here we go again. I've been working it's wired and it's all coming back again. So I thought, oh, maybe I'm going backwards. But are you saying that could be a sign that actually, in a weird way, I'm moving forwards?
Well, yeah, when we figured this stages of recovery thing out about 13, 14 years ago, it was a massive epiphany for us as practitioners, because we couldn't understand why people that seemed to be getting better suddenly appeared to be getting worse. Because there are things like, one of the classic signs of moving from stage 1 to stage 2 is sleep goes out of balance, feeling more wired and more anxious, feeling kind of not feeling a bit restless and not really being able to rest. And people are like, but I've just done all this stuff to calm my system. I've been really calm, and now I feel like I'm going backwards. But what it sounds like is happening is there is some energy that's now coming back, but that energy is spiking to your nervous system rather than going into real energy. The way to, and the reason why that, we think part of the reason why that tends to happen is on the way down into kind of crashing, we were using so much nervous energy that the system has got normalized to using that pathway. So your body is kind of used to fueling. So to back that up a little bit further, there's our normal energy production, like the mitochondria are producing energy, and therefore we have a kind of core base of energy. When that becomes low, we move to our stress hormones as a way of compensating. So that's our kind of reserve tank of energy, and that's the feeling of kind of the wiredness. So if we've been using a lot of that energy, which clearly you were because of what you were describing and how life was before, that's the energy pathway that your system is habituated to. So energy is coming back. What's it doing? It's putting it back into that pathway. So you're having to re-educate your system. You're kind of training your system, and you're doing that through calming, through noticing it, through relaxing. The other thing, which is, I think it's one of the, how's this for positive thinking? I think it's one of the hardest bits of the jigsaw for people to kind of navigate, which is that as energy starts to come back into your body, you can start, it helps to very carefully start to do a little bit more activity. Because what you want to do is you want to get your body to use the energy, not all of it, because you want to have energy reserves building up. So you're not just burning off everything that comes in, but that also starts to ground and help the activity. And so this is where we say the breakthrough at one stage becomes the limitation at the next stage. What I mean by that is the breakthrough for you had been you were pushing yourself to do 20 hours a week of your PhD, and the breakthrough was surrendering and resting. And that would have been, I'm sure, a very hard thing to do, kind of emotionally, that you were committed and passionate about what you were doing. And it would have, part of you would have felt like it was failure, it was giving up. And although it was a breakthrough, that would have taken a lot of heart and commitment to make that change. The kind of commitment over the last 7 months has been deep rest, deep rest, deep rest. And suddenly you need a bit more flexibility in the approach that, yes, you still need the deep rest, but as there's a little bit more energy, you can start to a bit more activity. But it's such a careful balance between not doing that with the achiever. Some days you can do a little bit more, other days you can't. Some days it's like, actually, you've got the nervous energy, but you just need to rest to ground it. So figuring out and learning how, and this is where a typical pacing approach is a disaster at this point, because that's a kind of rigid, this is what you should be doing. This is really learning the language of do I have some energy? Do I not? Is this just nervous energy that I need to rest? Or can I do a bit more activity to ground this energy? So really feeling into what's happening here becomes really important.
Yeah, that makes sense, because as I said before, there have been times where I've been resting and I just lie there and, when you can sort of feel it crawling down your body, the kind of feeling. But I do find on days where just by coincidence I've had to do a little bit more, like go to the doctors or something like that, or I do find it a lot easier to rest. And so I had been thinking, oh, is it because I'm just too tired and it's cutting through? Or am I actually using that wired energy into something physical, if that makes sense?
And that's the really, really subtle balance. And sometimes annoys people when I say this, but the best way of figuring that out is to make mistakes.
Right.
Because in the mistakes, you kind of go, oh, actually, I thought it was I had some energy and I'd feel better for using it. And actually, I felt worse that time. But then the next time, it's like you rested and it's like I would have felt better for doing a bit. So kind of really figuring that out, and the kind of information that dictates which of those is kind of different for everyone. And that's where us giving a kind of prescriptive, if you feel this, do this, and you feel that, do that, doesn't really work, because those internal kind of sensations are different for different people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you advise, kind of like traditional ME advices to keep like a symptom and activity log so you can track how it's affected you? Do you recommend something like that? Or
yeah, for 65 to 70% of people, and I'm making that number up, but that's what I think is about right. At this stage, that's quite helpful. Yeah. So for some people, that becomes a kind of analysis paralysis and a kind of obsession, and they start to get fearful of doing this because that, and it becomes a rabbit warren that's not helpful. But at this stage, more often than not, I think it is quite helpful. I think, you have the benefit of having I'm sure, a highly analytical mind, given the kind of PhD that you're doing a PhD, but also the kind of PhD that you're doing. Mm-hmm. So harnessing that, I think, will be helpful, but also remembering, in a sense, there's the analysis piece of it, but there's also learning to feel the sensations. And one of the things that when we've had a strong pattern of pushing through, that we've got really good at ignoring all of the information in our body because we're trying to push to the outcome we're trying to get. So actually learning to listen to and stay in touch with is part of the kind of learning at this point as well. But I think having a tracking activity, what I tend to recommend people do is track activity, track how you're feeling physically, and track track your kind of core energy and track your nervous system. So sometimes what people will see is that there's a correlation between nervous system goes up, increasing activity, and actually energy sustains and is okay. Other times, nervous system goes up, increased activity, energy crashes. So you're trying to kind of find the balance between those three markers, in a sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. I was kind of thinking it was all doom and gloom, but it actually sounds like things are going forwards, even though they feel like they're going backwards, which is really good. Yeah,
I would be cautiously optimistic. Yeah. is how I would approach it. So I wouldn't be recklessly optimistic and go, oh great, it's all fine, because then the chances, all the kind of old patterns of kind of achiever and kind of pushing and stuff is going to hijack. And this is a very delicate phase of the recovery process. And there's a lot of, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. That's just not perfect, but it's a little bit like you're trying to grow a rare flower in a kind of slightly barren kind of land. And it's like, it comes up if you get a bit too much water or a bit too much sunlight, it dies and you have to kind of start to try again. Yeah. Now, you're not going back to square one, but it's like it just starts to blossom and then you go a bit too far. And then it's like you have to kind of, so there's lots of bumps and ups and downs. But given where you are, and as long as you're kind of cautious, those downs shouldn't be particularly painful or significant. We're talking about a kind of day or so, as opposed to kind of month-long crashes, which is, what you might have experienced historically.
Yeah, definitely. And I have found, like, as I said, I didn't sleep very well last week. And I found like my crash was like a weekend rather than a couple of weeks, which was like, that's the first time in such a long time that I've moved through a crash so quickly.
Yeah, and that again is a very good sign. And that's what I would expect at the stage that I think you're at. But that's also, to hear that is a confirmation, and that's a really good sign. The way to think about it is, in a sense, your energy is at a kind of flat line, has been at a kind of, it feels like it's been a flat line like this. What I would say is actually you had a significant debt, and in a sense you were paying off that debt. So, it's a little bit like, someone's, I don't know, £10,000 in debt, and they're paying off £100 a week or something. And as far as they're concerned, it's like, I still haven't got any money, I'm still in debt. But actually it is going down. And then suddenly you get to the point that you've paid it off. And of course, on that analogy, it's 2 years to pay it off. So that's not a perfect analogy, but let's say you're paying off £500 a week. But anyway, the point being that you get to the point that there's now a little bit of energy that is actually there, but it's kind of, it's still delicate. And let's say you've got £200 a week surplus, but suddenly the car breaks down, the boiler breaks down, and you're kind of straight back into deficit again. So it takes patience, but it sounds like, having been paying off and kind of getting to a flat line, you are now, your basic energy, with having cleared the SIBO, with having calmed your system, having had some deep rest, now getting in the mitochondrial support, which means that you're actually giving the raw ingredients to help your energy production. Your energy is gradually on the up. It just needs to be treated carefully, because as soon as you get carried away, it's like you've got £400 in the bank, but that can disappear in an afternoon if there's suddenly an emergency that you have to deal with. So it's building up gradually those reserves. And sometimes what people see at this point is initially not a significant noticeable change in their core energy, but they notice a bit more resilience. So they notice that they come out of crashes a bit more quickly, that they can just tolerate a bit more, that they feel a bit more symptom-free at baseline. So sometimes those early signs are not particularly exciting, but they're good signs of foundation. And then you start to see more of the increase in energy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
So I would be cautiously optimistic and be gentle and be patient. And I understand it's, to go through what you've been through, well, of course, 7 years, I'm sure, has been really, really hard. But particularly going through the last 7 months, I think can be a really challenging one, where it's like, I'm doing all the right things. Why am I not feeling better? But hopefully this gives a bit of more context and a bit more explanation around some of what's been happening. Yeah,
definitely. I think when you're in the midst of it, you find it, you can't see the perspective of like, I've been like 7 years pushing, so of course I'm not going to, rest for a week and then start feeling better. But yeah, everything you said has like really, really helped me feel a lot better about my situation. And I think there's a lot to be like hopeful for, because I just wasn't seeing that before, because you can be so in the midst of how tired you feel. But it's actually really exciting. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. And I think one of the things I'd also say is that watching and listening to recovery stories, one of the challenges is we hear the main beats of the story, but we don't necessarily, even if they're talked about, we don't really hear the bits of these kinds of periods of time where you feel like you're doing all the right things, but there isn't any kind of immediately, like the thing that you're really wanting to measure it by is, do I have more energy? And the fact that that measure has not yet really been hit, it's easy to feel like it's failing. But I think it's an important point to make that the majority of the recovery stories that we put out, they're not necessarily, every story is different, but we'll have these kinds of chapters in the story where it feels like things have not been changing. And sometimes it's the point where the most change has been happening. It's just because the way we want to measure it is not necessarily the way that we can measure it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can see those unhelpful ones where people, it's amazing for them, but they get better within like 3 months or whatever. And you're like, oh God, I've been like nearly a year now or whatever. But yeah.
We really try to avoid putting those out because they make everyone else feel bad. And of course they happen. But, the most people, when you've been ill for 7 years, like, a month for each year to be kind of building back up to a kind of a foundation is actually not bad. Although it's still 7 months more suffering than you want to be experiencing.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, that's really true. Yeah.
Good. Any final questions that you've got for now?
I did have just a quick one. On the days where I'm feeling like I need a rest and I've gone for a rest, but it's difficult and all these anxieties coming up or whatever, do I kind of persist with the meditation or whatever, or should I find something different to do, like an audio book or have a bath or something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one of those ones that I think we kind of, again, learn by error in a sense. Yeah. So sometimes on those days, it's really helpful to be really persistent with working with calming your system, using the tools that you've got. And sometimes the best thing you can do is give up for a day and go, I'm just gonna leave myself alone. Like right now, I just need some deep rest. You're going to sleep. You're going to listen to an audio book. You might watch a movie if you've got capacity to do that. Wherever you are in terms of capacity at that point. And the strange thing is sometimes when we quote unquote give up for a day, it's actually the most surrendered day we've had in months, because it's like otherwise we're in a crash and we're always trying to kind of make the crash better or get out of it faster. So it's a balancing act, and certainly using the tools to calm the system is more often than not is helpful. And it is okay sometimes to go, do you know what? I'm just going to leave myself alone today. Yeah,
that is true. Because sometimes when I've been finding meditation difficult, I've just said, I'm just going to watch telly today. Then the next day, it's a lot easier to get back into it. So, yeah.
The sofa therapy with Netflix or whatever it is you're watching really does have its place. And for people that are the light sound sensitive, just a day of audiobooks or a day of like whatever it is that's within the capacity. But that's underrated as a strategy sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you so much for all your advice. It's just been so helpful, and I'm feeling really positive now, which I wasn't before. So.
Yeah, good. And as I say, be cautious in the optimism. What I mean by that is don't let it get carried away. But I think there is a lot for you to be optimistic about, because I think you've actually, from my point of view, I'm not saying there aren't going to be bumps in the road. I'm sure there will be, but I think you've done some of the really hard stuff over the last 7 months, and I think you will start to see more fruition from that in the coming kind of weeks and months. So why don't you send me an update, if you don't mind, in the early new year, kind of early to mid-January, and let me know how you're doing at that point. It'll be good to hear.
Yeah, thank you. I will do, definitely. Yeah, thank you.
You're really welcome, and thanks for being willing to share of your story. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It was really great. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Have a good day. Thank you.
See you.
Bye. Bye. I hope you enjoyed that mini session. As I mentioned at the start, if you want to find out more about the stages of recovery, then check out 3 Stages of Recovery, Alex Howard. If you search on YouTube, you'll find some videos on that. And we've now done a bunch of these mini sessions, and each of these mini sessions brings a different kind of facet and element of the recovery journey. So do check out on YouTube, probably the easiest place to go to. There's a kind of growing archive of these sessions. Tomorrow is Wellness Wednesday, and I'm talking with our Director of Nutrition, Kirsty Cullen, again, and we're giving a bit of an overview of the Optimal Health Clinic approach to nutrition. And indeed, in this mini session, we were talking about some of the impacts of working with the mitochondria and supporting the body from a nutritional point of view. So I think tomorrow's video will be a good way of understanding a bit more about how we do that. So I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.